Hello and welcome to the Two Mats podcast.
Happy Thursday, everyone.
Brought to you by the subscribers of the New European.
God bless him.
We are absolutely delighted to be joined by our German-splaining columnist Tanit Koch.
What Joe Rogan would call the great and mighty Tanit Koch.
The great and mighty
and rightly
Tanit
so.
Koch. Joining us live from Berlin. From Bonn.
From Bonn.
Excuse me, from Bonn.
Former capital.
Live and direct.
Former capital, Bonn. And Tanit, the reason, it's always a great pleasure to have you on our podcast, but the particular reason we've got you here this week is to try and give us a good grounding in the first half as to what's going on in the federal elections that are taking place this weekend in Germany, who the players are, what's changing, the role of the AfD. We'll come to all of these things, but I just thought, could you set the scene for us? Why are the elections happening in the first place?
Well, actually, they should have been happening September this year. But as you've probably sort of all noted, there was a coalition breakdown. It was the first time Germany had a three-party coalition consisting of the Social Democrats, the SPD, the Greens, and the FDP, which is a free market liberal party. They formed a coalition. It worked as long as they could sort of pour money into the system and make everyone happy, all the different sort of voters groups. At some point, the Constitutional Court said what you're doing is budget-wise anti-constitutional, so that the money was gone. And then it took another 3/4 of a year, sadly, for the coalition to finally sort of blow up or implode. And a lot of nasty hick-hack, knick-knack in between all those parties. But finally, we're getting early elections, which it's not a first, but it's rare because Germany is a rather stable system. People like stability. So there's a bit of insecurity among society. Will this work? What's happening next? And actually the big question, will it get better with another government coming, a different government? And there's been a recent, it's not a poll, but it's a sort of deep down psychological survey of people. And the outcome was that many people fear that actually nothing will change no matter which government we're going to have.
Right. The favourite, Tanit, is to become Chancellor is, I guess, Friedrich Merz, the leader of the centre-right CDU. Can you tell us what sort of politician he is, how he might differ from previous leaders of that party, and what kind of issues he'll be facing, not least, presumably, having to put together a coalition?
Sure. So Friedrich Merz is what you would call a classic conservative. Maybe not in the UK sense, but sort of he comes from a rural background. Lawyer's family. His grandfather was mayor of the tiny town in Sauerland, that's South Westphalia, sort of classic Western German socialization. Went to law school himself, is married to a judge. They have 3 children. He has 7 grandchildren. And basically, the way he's always portrayed is in a sort of he's Angela Merkel's sort of antipode or sort of the opposite within the same party. He left politics in 2009, already announcing it a couple of years earlier, because basically Merkel and he didn't get along, and she sort of put an end to his political career as he wanted it. And he very much disliked her policies. I think his father actually left the CDU in 2007 because of sort of being anti-Merkel as well. And so he moved into the private sector, worked as a lawyer, as a consultant, as a lobbyist for BlackRock, for sort of a lot of supervisory boards, which he chaired, which always gave him gave his opponents an easy way to target his proximity to big money, etc. But actually, when you ask about the big tasks ahead, it's actually coming in handy that there is somebody who's had at least some experience in the private sector, maybe too little experience in the political executive, because he's never actually run a ministry, he's never run anything, and his opponents now try to sort of target that. But currently, people really don't care as long as they get rid of the current Chancellor, which is Olaf Scholz, and he'll definitely as much as you can say definitely ahead of an election, but he said himself that he's not going to be the member of a cabinet. He will not run himself, and as it doesn't look like they're going to win the election, everything is set for Friedrich Merz, who has basically proclaimed two major sort of changes, Politikwechsel, politics change or policy change, as he calls it. One economically, to get Germany back on track economically. So we've lost our competitive advantage, huge energy prices, German industrial sector going down. I think 300,000 jobs lost within 3 years during that three-party coalition. And the other field is curbing illegal migration or putting an end to illegal migration. And both fields are what sort of resonate most with the electorate. So this is one reason he's probably going to make it.
Yeah, and one of the complications for Merz is the rise of the AfD and how he deals with the AfD, the relationship between the CDU, which is like our equivalent to the Tory party, right, and the AfD, who are probably, to be fair to UKIP and Reform, they're probably much further to the right or more nakedly to the right than even Nigel Farage is. In Germany, you have this concept of a firewall with extreme parties, both on the left and the right. And as I understand it, it's an agreement between the mainstream parties not to cooperate at state level or at national level with extreme parties. Is that a correct understanding? And Merz has slightly tarnished that or diluted that agreement. Is that right?
Well, partly yes. The first thing you have to understand is that when the last government started in 2021 and it was a left-wing government, AfD was at 10-11%. And they've doubled in the polls during a left-wing government. So to blame the CDU, which is often done, that they're not tough enough on AfD and they're not sort of, is actually unfair, because the rise of the AfD, I'm talking about the last 3 years, there was a moment, that was Merkel's moment in 2015, when AfD was below the threshold of 5% and would have gone. Then came the refugee crisis and the lack of solving the problems caused by the refugee crisis, which gave AfD a chance to mobilize and a push in the polls. So from nearly gone, they moved back to very much there and very much in parliament. But the last 3 years gave them yet another push to come to 20%, and they'll probably get around 20%, maybe slightly less, maybe slightly more on Sunday. The firewall concept, the word itself, which in German is Brandmauer, literally meaning firewall, actually has been created by AfD itself. They accused CDU and others of building that against them, and it's sort of slipped into the general vocabulary right now. Friedrich Merz has now stopped using the term. It's not as if there was a sort of general agreement among all parties not to work with the extremes, because there isn't sort of extreme left party, two by now, which the CDU has always vowed not to work with, not on state level, not on national level, neither with the far right. But for instance, the Social Democrats wouldn't have any trouble at all working, and don't have any trouble at all working, with the far left. So it's basically the CDU that says, yeah, we won't work with the far left, we won't work with the far left, far right either. And what happened about a fortnight ago was that after the atrocious attack in Aschaffenburg, which was yet another atrocious attack by an illegal immigrant, attacking kindergarten children, killing a 3-year-old with a Moroccan background, and killing a grown man who tried to help, and injuring many others. And this was, I think, the 5th incident of that sort within 9 months. And they've been more which haven't been medialized at that level, but there was a general sentiment, and is a general sentiment, that enough is enough. So what Friedrich Merz decided to do was stop the rhetoric and do something. The way he went about doing something was rather clumsily in Parliament, because he didn't try hard enough, some say, and I'd agree, to actually form a majority he didn't need AfD votes for. At some point, he just said, "Listen, these are my five. This is my anti-migration, anti-illegal migration plan, and we need to give more competencies to the federal police. And either you go with us or you don't. But I don't care where the votes are coming from." Had he not said that last sentence, "I don't care where the votes are coming from," nearly all would have been good. But as he said it, it obviously gave his political opponents a brilliant sort of opener to, within sort of 2-3 weeks before an election, to mobilize against the CDU. Chancellor Scholz sort of heavily tried to take advantage of that, saying he now doesn't trust Friedrich Merz anymore not to form a coalition with the AfD. He always thought he wouldn't, but now he's not sure anymore. Which I don't quite believe, but it resonates with the
Merz
wider.
did say, didn't he, in the I think the most recent debate,
Yes.
that he said to Alice Weidel, the leader of the AfD, I won't, not with you, no coalition with you.
Yeah. So Friedrich Merz is extremely firm, and I have no doubts that he'll stick to it, because it would be the end of his political career if he broke his word on that. If he said, "Okay, now we're gonna form a coalition, or we're gonna be tolerated by AfD," what he says very firmly is there will be no collaboration or cooperation, no working with AfD in any way. The thing is, had he not sort of had he not gone for that move in Parliament, what happened was that a non-binding motion was passed with the help of AfD that wouldn't have been passed without AfD. Non-binding. So you may question why all the fuss for a non-binding motion. They tried for a bill as well, and that didn't pass because, well, anyway, too complicated. But it definitely gave a massive mobilization, actually, to the far left, which people already sort of saw out of Parliament altogether. And they, through sort of TikTok videos and heavily campaigning on, we need to stop the far right, and the CDU sort of is going the wrong direction, etc. They managed to get the youth vote. I think we'll see many young voters go for the far left on Sunday. But Friedrich Merz is adamant he will not work with AfD, and the example of Austria, where the sort of the sister party, also sort of center-right, ÖVP, at some point cooperated with the FPÖ, with the far right, and in the end is now sort of diminished to not winning elections anymore, but being sort of coming second to the far right, is a good example of what Friedrich Merz and what the CDU do not want for themselves. They realize if we work with them, people may not vote for us anymore because they think, okay, AfD would be the better choice. So any form of cooperation with AfD would be self-harm. On the other hand, you have 20% of the people who vote for AfD, many of whom would actually say, listen, this is democracy. Why don't you work with them? We want you to form. So there's I think, according to the polls, there is a significant number of people, let's say roughly a third, who'd say, yeah, we'd like an AfD CDU coalition.
Let's say Merz sticks to his word, at least initially. Is it plausible that he could form a kind of coalition of all the talents, which included the Social Democratic SPD?
So most probably, well, as we know, we have a different election system. So there's no chance he's going to have the absolute majority sort of CDU and the Bavarian Sister Party. So he must form a coalition. The Bavarian Sister Party has already ruled out the Greens as a coalition partner very early on in the short electoral campaign, which I'm not sure they can stick to.
Yes.
The Greens are, if you look at their communication, their campaign, they are absolutely willing to do anything to be back in government. They really want to. So the question there will be, what price are they willing to pay to enter a coalition? Whereas with the SPD, you have the youth organization and the left wing of the Social Democrats, who, if there's a chance of Greens and CDU, if they had a majority, there would be a significant number of left-wingers within the Social Democrats who'd say, we'll rather go into the opposition than form yet another grand coalition. So that's something that's completely speculative right now, because we'll have to wait for Sunday's results, which will come in early evening.
But to read you right, Tanit, I mean, if I read you right, given the firewall and the likely reasonably strong to possibly quite strong performance of the AfD, assuming Merz and the CDU-CSU finish first, their options are limited, aren't they?
Exactly. And what some people do not understand, although it's quite obvious, if you have that firewall towards the far right in particular, then you basically take 20% out of the overall sum.
Yeah.
So the AfD is actually best news for any left-wing party, because it means that they automatically have a seat in cabinet, because the CDU, as you rightly said, or the Union, we say CDU, CSU, have limited options. So this is actually why people fear that even though there'll be a new chancellor and it will be a conservative one, the real change they're campaigning on, Politikwechsel, complete change of like a U-turn in certain fields, is not going to happen, because they can't run things on their own. They need a coalition partner, and we'll see how sort of flexible those coalition partners will be.
Tanit, let's just step away from the technicalities of the election and focus a bit more on the issues that are bubbling around in Germany right now. You mentioned the two main drivers, the economy. Germany's suffering the longest recession it's experienced for more than 20 years now, I think.
Yeah.
So there are big problems in the economy, but probably like the UK and the United States and everywhere else you can think of right now, migration is, and illegal migration especially, is top of the list of the things people are talking about. Is that, how true of that is it in Germany, and what is the potential solution? Because unlike the UK, Germany is within the European Union. There is freedom of movement, freedom of travel. There are rules about returning migrants to the place of entry, which, as you've written in your column in the New European, haven't been followed in Germany. So presumably that'll be part of the answer. But what is Merz saying he's going to do about migration and illegal migration?
Well, he's so far he's promised more than he can keep, because sort of shutting Germany's borders or completely closing them down is something sort of the European treaties don't really have proper rules for. There are emergency rules which sort of can be used, and Brussels looks away for a time, but you can imagine sort of Germany has 9 neighboring countries, and if we shut our borders to asylum seekers and they then are all stuck in Austria, well, thank you very much. And I think Luxembourg has already announced they'll seek, or they'll go to the European Court if Germany sort of continues to have sort of full border control, etc. So it's a very complicated issue, as it is in the UK, as it is anywhere. I think generally what people do understand is that Merz is very serious about really wanting to bring about a change in terms of the number of people who come into Europe in the first place. So the Greens and the Social Democrats point to Brussels and to Strasbourg and say, well, but we've had that compromise, and it's going to be implemented in 2026, the sort of joint European EU approach on asylum seekers. What they neglect to say is that, for instance, for asylum seekers from Syria and Afghanistan, it doesn't work. Like the speedy process, let's call it, sort of having a very speedy check of do they get asylum or not, and then a very speedy return, in theory. It doesn't even work for, or won't even work for Syrians or people from Afghanistan, because their acceptance numbers into the asylum system is too high to make them part of that speedy transfer and transfer back system. So there is a lot of dishonesty when it comes to communicating the actual issues to the wider public, because just saying, oh, we found a compromise, also neglecting to say that the Greens actually diluted that compromise by putting more and more and more thresholds into the system. So I think a lot of European countries, the Dutch, the Danes, Hungarians anyway, also the French, will be quite happy that Germany sort of will take a different stance and not make things even more difficult for them in Strasbourg and Brussels, as they are anyway. But bottom line, if we look at what's happening with USAID, remember the 2015 crisis was caused because I think of a shortage of $3 to $6 million in food aid. This is what made people move and leave their refugee camps and migrate. And if we don't find a way to very quickly both sort of stop the reasons for people to come, have bilateral agreements with many countries, sort of easing ways to return asylum seekers that aren't accepted, and equally finding a way to have legal migration for those people we actually want to migrate, this is going to be sort of a disaster in the making. And then we're not talking about sort of AfD at 20%, but at 40%. But just to make one thing clear, I think you should not sort of implement this or that policy because of AfD, but because you think it's the right policy. And if you think you've identified a problem, and illegal migration and the consequences are a problem for the system, no matter how you think, how liberal you are about sort of cultural diversity, etc., they're sort of putting a massive strain on the German system, on housing, the health system, the budget, etc., etc., etc. And on top there is AfD. But I think if you hear what Friedrich Merz is saying, and he's already sort of dimmed down his rhetoric about sort of deporting everybody who shouldn't be here, which in practice is more difficult than just saying it. He is serious about having a European approach and also a German approach to make things work better than they used to work.
Okay, we're going to take a very quick break, and we're going to come back and talk. I mean, it's been a dizzying week for Europe in general, so we're going to talk a bit more about Trump and Europe and Germany's role in all of that stuff.
See you in a minute.
Welcome back, dear listeners. We are delighted to be with Tanit Koch from her lovely apartment in Bonn. Thank you for joining us, Tanit. The New European's German-splaining correspondent has been doing an amazing job of German-splaining the elections. Can you help us German-splain a little bit about what's going on in
rest of world
in the rest of the world? I mean, the last week has been, like I said before the break, absolutely dizzying, hasn't it? I can't think of another time in my lifetime where quite so much has been thrown up in the air.
Well, maybe we should start. Tanit, how did you react? What was the general reaction to J.D. Vance's extraordinary speech at the Munich Security Conference, essentially hectoring his audience and specifically the hosts of the conference for not allowing the AfD to be part of it, and then saying firewalls were a bad idea, and then going off and meeting the leader of the AfD, Alice Weidel?
Well, after all we've seen and heard, I think we shouldn't have been shocked, but people still were shocked, and I was, I wouldn't say shocked, but irritated to some degree, which I hadn't thought possible, because of the sheer arrogance and ignorance of that, speech, if you may call it that, but it was a hectoring, really. And I think this is sort of a glimpse of what we're going to see. Shouldn't really be surprised, because, I mean, they would say you've had it coming, but if you take it down and sort of separate all the different aspects of it. I think the one elephant in the room is Europeans want to be regarded as a sort of sovereign entity, let it be either the nation states or the EU. But we're not sovereign enough to look after our own security. So that is something that has been neglected to an extent that is, well, I wouldn't call it criminal, but has been has shown a lack of responsibility for decades and decades and decades. I'm especially talking about Germany here. UK, different story. France, different story. But Germany has outsourced its defense to the United States, and we should have known in 2016 that this is over, and people still did not really see what the Americans were going to do, what the Trump administration was going to do.
Can I just ask a question related to that, Tanit, which is a few days after the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Olaf Scholz, the current Chancellor, announced the Zeitenwende, the turn of the times, to great acclaim and noise, and it seemed a big moment that this was going to mark a pivot in Germany's approach to defence and the management of its economy. Is that strategy still alive?
Rhetorically, in words, yes. It wasn't too little, too late, but we're not. So people, I think, overall have realized we have to do more. And 4 years ago, you couldn't have campaigned on sort of pushing the German Bundeswehr, spend more military spending. This would have been a non-issue or a loser's issue if you sort of put it into your party program. So I think in general, everyone apart from the far left and AfD, interestingly, now agrees we have to up our game massively to stand up to the bullies. And this is what Olaf Scholz basically said in Zeitenwende. What he did afterwards was, well, not going. I mean, would Ukraine be there where it is right now had we done a lot more? And Germany has done a lot.
It has done a lot, yes.
Depending which statistic you look at, we've done a lot more than others. But while Russians have completely switched their whole economy into a wartime economy, we haven't done that. And if you talk to sort of arms manufacturers in Germany, I've recently had a conversation with one just last week in Berlin, and he said they're producing what they're producing, sort of not knowing whether the government will eventually pay for it, because Olaf Scholz is literally sitting on the budget and isn't allowing it to flow. So I think this will change rather quickly. I think the German fiscal rules will probably be changed in order to have more money in a constitutional way to support our defense. But currently it's difficult to stand up to the Americans if they can always say, but come on, you need us. So I think what Trump's administration obviously looks down upon is a needy Europe. They don't take us seriously. Yeah. So the answer is, in order to be taken seriously, we really need to do more for our own defense, for our own business perspectives, and just sort of the German term would be broad-shouldered, broad back. There are a lot of things the Americans do better, but it's not as if we, like as Europe, as a market of the size we have, consumers that can actually, if you put certain tariffs in place, they can harm the American economy as much as they can harm ours. So there's no reason to sort of I don't know, hide and or emigrate or do whatever, but instead of just listening what the Americans say, we should concentrate on what the Europeans should do in order to really sort of get the sovereignty we actually never thought we needed ever since the end of the Second World War. So what is happening now is a complete shift, historical shift of the consensus that there was a value-driven West. In the sort of, we had the Western allies. Germany at some point got into the equation, and this alliance of values sort of stands up to to the bullies in the world. And Trump has decided he doesn't mind bullies as long as he's getting a good deal.
Yeah, I'm increasingly reminded of that great Mike Tyson quote. You talked about, we should have seen this coming, and Tyson, of course, famously said, "Everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face." And it feels like we got punched in the face last week. Yeah, we sort of knew that this was coming. We sort of knew this was around, but we got punched in the face big time. And now, can we get off the floor and fight back? It feels like we're in a. It does feel, I don't think I'm overstating it to feel like this is an existential moment for Europe.
It is. Interestingly, when it comes to sort of domestic issues like AfD and the firewall, I'm not sure it helps AfD to have J.D. Vance and Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who are not considered A, the most German savvy, B, the most, well, personality-wise, people you'd want to hang out with or you'd want to take advice from the way they behave. There is still a lot of anti-Americanism in Germany, which was partly sort of pushed by the AfD. I mean, they can't believe their luck, but it's if you look at what their rhetoric, saying we're basically, Alice Weidel always claims she never wrote that email, but there is an email which probably was written by her saying that Germany is still run by imperialist powers, post-war powers, etc. So that anti-imperialist, both far left as well as far right sentiment towards America is yet another thing playing into it. But the wider German public is not amused at all to have and isn't sort of bowing to an American lecture going like, oh, now you need to tear down the firewall. On the other hand, just a reminder, we had half our left-wing cabinet rooting for Kamala Harris quite publicly. And I think Keir Starmer did likewise. They even funded people helping the Democratic campaign. And maybe this is a lesson. If you don't want them to interfere in our domestic issues, we should not interfere in theirs. Because what right do we have to tell Americans how to vote?
Yeah. I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? Because in a sense, declaring Zelensky a dictator, blaming Ukraine for the war, sending the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio to Saudi to meet Sergei Lavrov, keeping Zelensky out of the loop at that point. Essentially, Trump has changed sides. America is now backing Putin rather than Zelensky, and B, without formally saying so, he's de facto withdrawn America from the Western alliance. So I wonder how that's playing in Germany, which of course geographically is closer to Russia than the UK, and these issues must feel all the more pressing, I imagine.
I'm not sure everyone here has actually realized what it means that defending Ukraine, which it comes down to, and we're here sort of in our cozy studios and apartments, but I can't imagine what this must feel like for Ukrainians to hearing a complete distortion of the truth. Suddenly, Zelensky is the aggressor. I mean, the absurdity of it all. So massively troubling. I've difficulty finding the right words in English. The degree of how dangerous the situation is, because if Putin gets leeway or free hand on Ukraine, where will it stop? Does anybody think Trump is going to defend the Baltics or Poland? And you see, with Germany specifically, there is a vast number of people in this country who fear war. Not just nobody likes war, but with Germans, and it's not peaceniks. It's whenever Scholz, which he did frequently, reminded everybody that Putin has the bomb, it helped him. People sort of liked him for not making Germany sort of one of the actors in that war, whereas all French and all British governments have sort of stood up to Putin, which he then reacts to. And Germany so far has not done a proper job in that regard. So the parts of society seriously fear nuclear war, a third world war, and would rather go sort of appeasing Putin and getting cheap energy. This is what AfD is actually campaigning on, and the far left New Party as well, appeasing Putin, stopping the war simply by appeasing him, and then getting our cheap gas again from the Kremlin.
Tanit, is there still a difference in attitudes, political attitudes, between the old East and the old West in Germany?
There is. There are a few very good books that were published about this recently, and everyone in the late 80s and early 90s thought, okay, once reunification is fully accomplished, the East will be like the West. It won't. It most probably will never be. Political cultures, general mentalities are so different. 40 years in a dictatorship do something, plus sort of 10 years in very insecure circumstances after that revolution, after the fall of the wall, does something to people. So there's a different mentality, there's a different sentiment. Not everyone in the East is alike. Northeast is very different from Southeast, as is Hamburg from Munich. But you can there are a lot of maps and a lot of statistics where you can easily sort of track the border, the former border, simply by looking at the colors, numbers, etc. On the map. It's not enough though to explain AfD, because if you look at the last state elections in Hesse and Bavaria, I think in Hesse AfD came second. If you look at the former strongholds in the Ruhrgebiet, social democratic strongholds, they now will probably fall to AfD. So this is actually an issue that concerns everyone in the whole country across all parties. And I imagine if we had had better politics, better policies in the last 3 years, AfD wouldn't have fared that well.
Well, it's been fascinating.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
So much to chew on.
When will we actually know the results? Will we know on Sunday night or on Monday or?
We'll know by Sunday. Well, there's one big question mark or many small question marks regarding how many people will actually make it into parliament, because this could potentially completely change the arithmetic of which coalitions can be formed. So there is a very slim chance that there is a far left coalition with the Social Democrats, with the Greens, with the far left, and with that oddity of a new nationalist left thingy. But this would mean the Greens would actually have to go for that, and I don't, but that's a sort of tiny chance. There is a chance we need another three-party coalition, which no one wants. But depending on whether the Liberals, there are sort of a couple of parties which fare between 4 and 5, or 4.5 and 5.5, and depending on whether they'll get into parliament, they'll get seats. This could sort of completely throw things around. So to watch out for sort of, will these parties make it? This could be a long night. But normally we get the exit polls so they're sort of flowing around late afternoon, but the sort of official exit polls are published by the large public broadcasters at around 6:00.
Okay.
And the first proper polls, or sort of counting, not polls, the numbers then sort of flow in throughout the evenings. But usually exit polls can be quite telling. But when it's a very narrow margin for those 4 to 5% parties, for them it could be a long night.
Racing times.
We will be watching.
We'll be watching
very keenly
and thinking of
I'll
you.
be in a TV studio. I'll be live. That's why I'm in Bonn, because
great.
There's a news channel, Phoenix, and I'll be spending the afternoon live in the studio, and then go back
Lucky
to
them.
Berlin.
So any German listeners can tune in.
That's what you should be listening to.
Phoenix, is it called?
Phoenix, yes.
Phoenix, yeah, great.
Phoenix, yes.
Tanit will be bringing you the news as it happens.
Lucky viewers.
How exciting! Well, look, we look forward to speaking to you again soon when all the dust settles and we can work out what it all adds up to. But have a fantastic weekend. I'm sure you're going to be run off your feet. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
And please, dear listeners, if you don't subscribe to the New European, Tanit writes the most amazing column every single week.
Absolute must read.
Called Germansplaining, and it's brilliant. It's a little bit. It reminds me of Alistair Cook's Letter from America.
It's very much that,
but
yeah.
from Germany.
Only better.
Only better. Yeah. Tanit, see you soon.
See you soon.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
All the best.
You too.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Well, that was
That was
fantastic.
fascinating as always, Tanit. So interesting and well informed.
She's brilliant. She's brilliant. So do read more of Tanit Koch and much more besides
Absolutely.
in the New European when you subscribe from just £1. £1 for 5 weeks. Don't forget our special offer, and then just a £5. So if you
You'd be mad not to, really.
I mean, honestly, folks, if
I'm
you
not
like
sure
this,
how.
if this podcast brings any value to your life, I can guarantee the newspaper will add even more value.
In a world of doubt and uncertainty, there are a
Yeah.
few things you can cling to, and subscribing to the New European is one of them.
Well, also, mate, I paid £4.10 for a flat white at Starbucks on the M6 the other day. Right?
I mean, it makes
A fucking flat white costs £4.10.
And for that, pretty
I'm asking
much,
for a £5 for a whole month of the New European.
month of the glory of the New
Yeah,
European.
and just £1 for the first month. And you can cancel any time. Right, I'm overselling
You can't
it.
cancel a flat white once you've ordered it. That's it.
That's it, exactly. And it goes cold. Right. So, yeah, go to theneweuropean.co.uk/2Matts, the number 2, MATTS, just £1 for your first week. Cancel anytime. Do it. You'll cheer me up no end. Send in your observations, emails, questions to 2Matts@tnepublishing.com. We'll be spilling through some of the huge mailbag we got this week on Sunday's episode. Don't miss that.
Don't miss that.
And thanks as ever to our publishing team, our production team, led by Matt Hill from Rethink Audio. Thank you, Matt. And until Sunday,
Goodbye from me.
it's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.